Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's basketball webcast. This is sports editor Joe Walljasper along with Tribune basketball beat writer Steve Walentik. Steve, Missouri's coming off a 37-point victory over Oregon. Impressive in just about every way in that game. Did that game tell you anything you didn't already know about this team?
Not much, to be honest. And it's weird to say that when it was as lopsided as it was, but first of all, I don't think this was a particularly good Oregon team. Had already lost to Portland, and obviously Portland's been one of the Cinderella teams of the early season, but also lost to Montana at home by double figures. So I don't think that's a particularly great opponent. And we've seen Missouri do this. We were talking about this during the game on Saturday. We've seen Missouri do this to a lot of people since Mike Anderson's been here. They just roll over people at home. They've won 34 consecutive non-conference home games now under him, and 30 of those have been by double figures. And included in that list are teams like Arkansas a couple years ago, Purdue, Cal last year. They beat by 27 points. That was a tournament team. It doesn't matter. They just play differently at home, and particularly when teams want to run with them, like Oregon certainly tried to do. You put them in their comfort zone, and they can start hitting a lot of shots and really piling up the points. And even into conference play, we've seen them beat teams like Texas that were clearly better in terms of talent than them, but something about that building when they get running that it just balloons. And
maybe it wasn't surprising, but I think you do have to give credit to Mike Anderson's teams that were unlike you would see a lot of times with Quinn Snyder. They would lose maybe one game a year at home they shouldn't against a team like a Sam Houston State or a Davidson or whatever. And it just not only doesn't happen to him, it just doesn't come close to happening. I think that's a style of play thing or whatever, but for whatever the reason, I think you got to give them some credit for that. It kind of leads into my next point, which is if they're that good at home, would it behoove them to schedule a lot tougher, get a lot more big-name opponents, and then, every other year you're playing them at home? Maybe that's going to be a better way to build up your resume than obviously beating up on the lesser teams.
I think so. In this particular season, I'm not sure they wanted to play a more ambitious schedule than the one they're playing because they're relatively young. I know they've got a lot of guys that played a lot last year, but everybody's in different roles, and they've got 3 seniors, but Taylor was really the only guy on the team that played a lot before last season, and losing 3 starters. I think there was a lot of turnover and certainly some question marks up front that needed to be answered early in the season. Still haven't really been answered with this team, and because of that, I don't think Mike Anderson and his staff really wanted to go start playing, the 10 best teams in the country or anything close to that. I think you want to kind of ease into that. I do think going forward, me personally, I'd love to see them play a more ambitious schedule. It makes it more interesting to write about.
If you're going to win your home games either way, you might as well play better teams, I would think. The other issue is it takes 2 teams to make a schedule, and I don't know if Missouri is the kind of opponent that other teams are going to be wild about playing because who does it really get you ready for? Nobody else really plays this way, or very few teams do, so I don't know that they're a team that people really are wild about scheduling in the non-conference. They have some interesting rotation issues going on. They lose on the road at Vanderbilt. For instance, a guy like Miguel Paul doesn't play at all in that game. He had been pretty decent, kind of a pleasant surprise in the really early games. He doesn't play at all that game. He comes back and plays against Oregon and plays pretty well. Kind of, what do you make of what their rotation is now, and maybe where's a guy like that fall in?
Well, I think based on the way he played against Oregon, he had 6 assists in that game. He's going to play more in going forward in bigger games. He does seem to make things happen when he's on the floor. He's second in the team in assists right now with 20, and he's only played 88 minutes. Only Zaire Taylor, who's played, I don't know, I think it's almost twice as many minutes, has more assists. And, he's a guy that looks for other people when he's out there, and I'm not sure they have that many guys that are doing that right now. He certainly has helped a guy like Lawrence Bowers get going a little bit, throwing alley-oop passes and lobs and stuff to him, and I think they have pretty good chemistry, the 2 of those guys, considering that they're looking for anything that can help them get those guys going up front, I think Mike Anderson's probably going to look at him a little bit more often. I still think he's probably the sixth best guard on their team, and if they're only going to play 5 guards, he's going to be the first guy to get sat down. But I do think that there's a reason to try to play all 6 of those guys.
Speaking of pleasant surprises, Zaire Taylor was a guy last year who did a great job running the team. He wasn't much of a shooter. He made a big shot, we all remember, but I mean, just as far as being a classic outside shooter, he wasn't. This year he has been making about 59% from three-point range. Just a coincidence, in a 7-game span, or do you think this, from what you see of him, is this something that can continue and he can be, Missouri's maybe second perimeter threat?
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that he's not going to shoot 59% from three-point range for the season, but I do think he can be a good shooter. I think fundamentally he looks like a pretty good shooter. I know that's something that he and Matt Zimmerman worked on a lot, and he worked on a lot by himself over the summer to be a better shooter. He was a 38% three-point shooter in 14 games as a sophomore at Delaware, so he's had some success before. He only made 33% of his threes last year for Missouri, but I think he's a guy, unlike a lot of guys on their team, I think he understands when is the appropriate time to take a shot. So I think his shot selection is better. That's going to help his percentage, and I do think he's worked on his form, he's worked on his release, and he's going to make more shots that way.
He seems like especially a guy that when they play inside out and they throw it to him from the inside, he can step into it. He really looks like
he's a very good rhythm shooter. Yeah.
Some quick hitters here. Missouri is shooting about 24 three-pointers a game. In your mind, is that a good number for them, or too many, too few?
I'd love to say it was too many, but I think with this team, with how little they're getting inside, they need to take that many. It seems like to just kind of even everything out.
I guess the one concern is when you go on the road, that seems like the stat that really changes a lot from home to the road. And I guess what we've seen from them this year, they've been not a great.
Though they did shoot well against Vanderbilt last week, so I agree with you. I don't think they can keep that up over the whole season, but they might have to try.
The Big 12, I can never remember this name. Big 12 Pac-10 Hardwood Series. Big 12 is dominated. Do you think this is kind of a statement about the Big 12's strength, or maybe the Pac-10's weakness, and to extrapolate how many Big 12 teams could you project going to the tournament when it's all done?
Well, the Pac-10 is definitely weak. There's no question about that this year. But I do think the Big 12 has a chance to be as good as the Big 10. Those are probably the top 2 conferences in the country. I think the Big 12 has a legitimate chance to get 7 teams in the tournament, and I wouldn't be surprised if one of those teams has an 8-8 league record, and that's still good enough to get them in.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. Next week, we will be back talking about Missouri's game against Oral Roberts and Charlotte Dickinson.